It's been more than 2 decades since the military lifted the ban stopping gay men and women from serving their country in our armed forces. Before then, and I think this would be a real shock to very many people, many of our service people suffered homophobia, were often forced to leave the services. Some were even sent to prison, losing their medals and their pension rights.
Well, as part of an independent review, veterans affected by that ban have been presented with a badge to mark the injustice they suffered. And they're refusing to wear it, many of them, until all the recommendations from the review have been honoured. Well, joining us now is Steve Purves, who served in the RAF but was sent to prison over a same-sex relationship, and campaigner Craig Jones, who kept his relationship secret for 5 years when he was an officer in the Royal Navy. I mean, I feel like I want to apologise to you both. You serve your country. We're talking about years after it was decriminalised, and you're still both treated like criminals. What an absolutely appalling state of affairs. Steve, just tell us, you were in the RAF, weren't you?
Yeah, I was joined the RAF at 16, became an officer, an engineering officer, and yeah, I got questioned and admitted what I admitted, and then got court-martialed, sent to prison, removal of all financial benefits and pension, all that sort of thing.
Homosexuality is decriminalised back in the 60s. We're talking now about, this is the 1980s.
Yeah, 1985.
Where it was still effectively against the law to be gay and be in the armed forces.
Yes.
Can you remember the day when you were confronted? How did it happen? How did you find out this was happening to you?
Well, actually, it was quite sneaky. The RAF police called me to their headquarters in Germany to talk about something, the personal effects of a chap who died, and I was his effects officer. And as I walked through the door, they said, do you know why you're here? I said, yes, I'm to talk about the personal effects of this chap. And they said, no.
They'd lied to you?
Yes. They said, think again. I said, I've got no idea what you're talking about.
So you're serving in Germany.
Yep.
You are called by your commanding kind of officers to a meeting about something else.
Yes.
And then they say to you, what did they say?
Well, there was some pregnant pauses whilst I didn't say anything. I said, I have nothing to say. You haven't asked me anything, so I'm sticking with that. And to cut a long story short, there was a bit of toing and froing, sighing, and they told me that they had got information which led them to believe that I had had a relationship with a young corporal, and if I was to confess to that, then they would allow me to speak to him on the telephone. So I did confess, and then they used my confession to court-martial me and dismiss me with disgrace, send me to prison for 6 months.
I said it in the queue. I think, you know, if my kids who are in their early 20s were watching this, they would be unbelieving that could have happened in Britain in the 1980s into the 90s. But I have to say, listening to your story, even I, you know, even though I know what the facts are and I knew how things were then, I still can't quite believe that we lived in a country where we should do that to somebody like you.
How old were you at the time, Steve?
28 when I got court-martialed. So I left with no references, no money, nothing.
And you served a prison
I'd served 13 years up to that point.
In the armed forces, but then you were sent to prison and spent 6 months in prison.
Yeah.
For something that was not a crime for anybody outside of the armed forces.
Correct, yes.
But was still a crime within the armed forces.
It's amazing.
So the main thing about that was that it then presented huge problems in terms of getting a job and surviving in life.
Of course.
And the chap I left with, little Steve, he, you know, we needed to start a life together from nothing, and that was very tough.
And Craig, the point about this is not only terrible things done to individuals like Steve, but also what impact that would have had on the wider culture in our armed forces, the sort of the suspicion, the bullying, the kind of the things which went on. I mean, how was it to serve in those times?
It was a dark time, and when the Prime Minister apologised on behalf of the British nation in July last year, he said that people were horrifically, physically and sexually abused in the course of their service because this was a hidden history. People could not talk about it. It was a toxic subject in the mess. I remember listening to dreadful conversations from my colleagues. It created an atmosphere in the armed forces that was very dark. You
were in the Royal Navy and you had to hide your relationship with your partner, same-sex partner, because you were afraid that you were going to experience what Steve experienced. I mean, other people were going to prison.
Yeah, I met the man who's now my husband in 1995. We'll have been together 30 years in February. And it was a wonderful moment in life of meeting my first boyfriend, but it was also a time of enormous worry. My parents were petrified that I would end up in prison. And we're both officers, so we would have served or Steve did serve in a civilian prison. And all could come crashing down. But at the same time, I was doing this wonderful job in our armed forces. I was serving in Northern Ireland. I was a deputy navigator of one of our aircraft carriers. So it was just such a strange thing that this whole community were prepared to step forward in the service of the United Kingdom. And yet, to those services, in some way, we were toxic, simply because we went home to same-sex partners.
There has been a review and a whole series of measures to try and put right this historic wrong. Tell us about the Eton ribbons, Steve. What are they, and why is there a protest using them?
OK. My own personal view is that I love the ribbon. I've met Lord Etherton.
Tell us about what the ribbon is for. What does it recognise?
It recognises that we have been through the trauma of being kicked out. So
anybody who was removed from the services for their sexuality...
For the sexuality.
...now will receive the medal?
Yes.
And do you have to apply for it, or do they come to you?
No, they... I believe you actually do have to engage with them to appear at some sort of parade or presentation.
Sure.
Yeah. You're due to receive yours later this month.
Yep.
But will you wear
RAF
it?
Cranwell. I will receive it with much gratitude and pride because of what it means and what efforts Lord Etherton went to get it produced as one of his recommendations. And I will keep it for a special occasion.
But, Craig, many people are not going to wear them at all because they feel that all the measures in the review, and they're afraid aren't going to be honoured, including compensation for wages lost, earnings lost, damage to mental health, job prospects.
I think in Stephen's case, I mean, Stephen went to prison, had to leave the service. I mean, clearly there was a personal financial cost to him.
The impact upon Stephen's life, and many other veterans, has been enormous and enduring. People from this community live their lives impoverished, lonely and isolated because of the way that they were removed from the armed forces, and it really must change. But one thing that I would say about the Etherton ribbon is this community has enormous respect for Lord Etherton. His report was a remarkable document, and it tells a story of a very, very difficult past. But the issue of compensation is unresolved. At the moment, the government expects that 4,000 people may step forward for compensation. The pot of money is 50 million. The average payment will be £15,000 for people that served 6 months in prison and whose lives have been wrecked by the ban. It's a derisory sum and an insult to members of our armed forces.
All I can say is thank you for your service, and I'm so sorry for the experiences that you've been through. I'm very grateful that you've joined us this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
The Ministry of Defence told us they deeply regret the treatment of LGBT serving personnel between 1967 and 2000. They also said the Eton ribbon shows a commitment to deliver all the recommendations, and they're working with experts to establish an appropriate financial redress scheme. So we will see how this develops. I'm sure you'll keep us in touch.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.